Hello and welcome to Lecture 1 of Making Meaningful Arguments. Now, I'm glad you're here, and I hope you're glad you're here, and I think you're probably here because you want to argue, but you're a little bit trepidatious maybe, a little frightened about the way argument is going in contemporary society. There doesn't seem to be a lot of space for it. Argumentation is seen as shouting one another down or clobbering somebody over the head with facts until they relent. They say, mercy, please, no more, you're right, whatever. Now, that's not a great thing, but you don't need me to tell you that. What this course is going to do is try to get you to reframe and rethink about how argument works or how it can work in the sense of what argument should be in order to help you take nasty, negative argument situations and sort of reframe them. So in this first lecture, what I thought we might do is talk about defining argument. What is it? How do we know what argument is? And what's really interesting about the history of argument is this definition has been one that many different people have taken on. I'm going to share with you the operating principles for this course and what argumentation, the way I see it, and what it could be defined as, to make it create meaningful arguments. So prepare yourselves to strap in. There's going to be a lot of assumptions about argument that I'm going to try to undermine that you might have walked into this class with. But I think at the end of the lecture, you should be able to say, oh, these are very productive sorts of principles that I could take on and use in a way to improve what I get out of argument. This class is designed to help you enjoy and maybe even seek out arguments so that you can enjoy and benefit from the power that argumentation has for all of us. So let's look at some of the assumptions I make about argumentation that might conflict with some of yours. Before we do that, once you get out a piece of paper, get out a scratch pad, something like that, get out your pen, and write down what you think argument is. I'd be very curious to see if your understanding of argument ends up being something similar to mine or something similar to what I'm suggesting it could be. So take a second to do that. I'll get the slide ready here. Are you done? I mean, I guess I don't really need to give you time. You can just pause this, I would think. Write it down. Maybe you should do that. Okay. So now that you've paused it and you're back, let's talk about some assumptions about argument that might surprise you. Number one, argument is communication. Argument is communication. We don't really think about argument as a communicative activity, but it's often done between people and using words and language or some attempt to convey or to alter meaning in another, which means that by definition, it's communicative. It's also trying to create a commonality. If you think about the word origin of communicative or communication, communis or community, that togetherness, that unifying sense. A lot of times people will use argument to bring people together, to eliminate discordant and disagreement. But it's communicative. I think of it as a reaching out. Instead of a pushing away or a knocking down or a reaching out more with a hand than a fist. And thinking about argument as communicative will really help you wrap your head around what's happening. It's not the destruction of what's true and good and right. It's an attempt to reach another person and hopefully get them to see the world the way you think they should see it or the way that you see it, which is most of the time what people do when they're arguing. Sometimes people will argue and say, well, you should see the world this way. It's not how I see it, but you should see it this way. But it's still kind of the desire to bend your mind towards what they want. Which is oftentimes how argument works. But it's communicative. It's not corrective, and it's not distributing the truth. It's an interaction between people. All right, second assumption, second thing that might shock you. People identify with positions. Now, this comes from rhetoric. We're going to talk about this in a later lecture, but rhetoric is the study of how meaning gets made through words and symbols. And rhetoric is my discipline, and rhetoric has a tradition of studying and advancing argumentation. You can study and advance argumentation from a number of different fields: philosophy, history, linguistics, English composition, lots of different places out there. But in my tradition, it says I have meaning making. And one of the things that the theorist Kenneth Burke, I'm going to lecture on a few lectures from now, talked about is how people identify with things. And this means that people rationalize those positions. So this might shock you, but this course is not going to be about how to find the best facts, the truth, the best evidence, and then whack people over the head with it. That's not argumentation. That's just, being selfish, not exploring your own ideas, not trying to make them and refine them, make them better. Hitting people over the head with facts isn't good, but it also just doesn't work. People will identify with a political position not because it's logical or factual, but because they like it. And then they will rationalize it after the fact. And that's something to keep in mind. People are often presenting something as if it were factual or true because they are defending a rationalization, they're defending a preference. And the more you understand that, the more ways you can find in their position to find ways to question it and to improve the quality of their thinking and to protect yourself from bad thinking that might be bullied into you by a very, very committed arguer who's like, this is facts, this is the truth, how come you can't see that? When really they're just kind of like dressing up, window dressing for a preference. That's something to think about. And finally, the most important one here, well, it's not finally, actually, there's another one. Finally, we have argument is about relationships. Argument is about relationships. That means it's not about the truth, it's not about the facts or who's right. It's about the relationship you want to have with the person you're arguing with, the relationship you want to have with the topic, the relationship you want to have with the information you're presenting, and the relationship you want to have with yourself and the quality of your own thoughts. So when you enter into argument, all of these things become diffuse elements in the process. You might be arguing something you truly believe in, and at the end of it, you might say, what kind of person am I to make those kind of arguments or to believe that? Am I a good person? And this would be the questioning of the relationship with yourself. Or you might say, who is Bob to say those things to me? Why doesn't he just agree with me? So you start to question your relationship with Bob, your interlocutor. Or you might say, why do I think this topic matters that much? It certainly isn't as important as the way I care for Bob. Maybe there's a way we could word it to reach a productive sense of agreement here. So that would be you to the topic. So don't freeze these things out. These are all pathways you can take in an argument. It's not always about who's right forever and ever and ever, which is the way people think of argument. It's about relationships, managing relationships, and what kind of relationship you want to have with thinking, with information, with other people. Finally, and this is really finally this time, for real, I checked. Arguing is not a zero-sum game, which means argument's not about winning. It's about understanding. It's about how we know. It's about what's possible, plausible, what could be. All of these things get squished away when we think of argument about fidelity with the truth, and one side can be true and one side can never be true. That's an oversimplification of it. And thinking that way is just going to harm you, even if you're on the side of justice and good in the world and improving people's lives. It's just going to harm your ability to do that. It's not a zero-sum game. You can have a win-win and you can have a loss-loss. We've all been there. Where people are like, okay, fine, if you're going to argue that way, fine, I don't want to talk to you ever again. Fine, I'll just never talk to you, and you storm off. Terrible. It's terrible. We don't want that. So those are some of the assumptions that I'm coming to this with. Now, a couple of final things here. Let's look at Wayne Brockreedy's understanding of argument, who's a scholar, a rhetorical scholar. He says it's a human activity. We're better off asking where argument is rather than what it is. It's an open concept, potentially everywhere, that's on a sliding scale of less or more rather than yes or no. It deals in the problematic, and it's about our perceptions and our choices. And that's kind of what I'm basing this on. It's Brockreedy's idea that argument is a where. It's a human activity. It doesn't have anything to do outside of humans. Another thinker, Professor Joseph Wenzel, wrote this, that argument could be a product, something made to give to someone, like if you write an essay or a letter to the editor. A procedure. It could be a congress, a parliament, or a courtroom, a place where we go through argument in order to figure out what to do, to go through a procedure of solving a problem. And then the final one, a process, something we do together to achieve something. And I would say maybe even just to achieve. It's a process that allows us to check ourselves and make sure that we are pursuing excellence or discover what other things are out there that we could be. So in this course, this final slide, I'll give my sort of definition that I'm implying from all this. You could, of course, come up with your own, and I encourage you to think about it often. Argument is in the service of people, helping us refine, improve, and find ways to act based on our beliefs and interpretations. There's so much space in there for reconsideration, for re-engagement. We're not talking about the truth for everyone for all time when we argue. We're not talking about indisputable facts. We're talking about what do we do with these facts? What decisions do we make together to help each other? That's what argument's about. And furthermore, I'm going to talk in two different notes during the course of these lectures. First, argument is something we can have. We can have exchanges with others. And argument is something we make. Like if you want to write a blog, start a podcast, or make YouTube videos, you're making a product other people will consider and consume but you're not having the argument with them. You're presenting an argument to them, and they're going to do what they want with it. So that's going to require a little bit of finesse, but I have 2 separate lectures coming up on that. So how did your definition of argument fare? Did you do pretty good? It's okay if you didn't, because argument is a fluid concept that changes with contingency and situation, and it was a live question in the ancient world, and it's still with us today. Defining argument, keep it open, think about the principles we talked about in this lecture, and you will be able to have meaningful arguments.